Gene was a very gentle person. He was very kind and considerate.
It just was his nature to be very charismatic and very outspoken.
He was a wonderful father, extremely patient at times when I know it must have been trying.
He was a straight shooter. If you asked Eugene a question, he'd give you a straight answer every time.
My father was in many respects a product of the Victorian age. He was born in the 1920s, but his father was very much a Victorian gentleman, and those values deeply suffused his being.
If you remember the movie Gone with the Wind, there was the character in there named Ashley Wilkes that was played by Leslie Howard. Eugene was Ashley personified. Ashley endured the war, Eugene endured the war. Ashley didn't seem to be able to forget the war. Eugene did not seem to be able to forget the war. They were both gentlemen, always gentlemen.
Gene had a very, very happy childhood in Mobile. He was so fortunate in that way. Although he had many childhood illnesses.
My friend Eugene was highly intelligent. He was constantly interested in bird life, any kind of animal life, just an all-around naturalist. When high school came along, we were almost inseparable. We were both in the Murphy High School band. We both played the snare drum.
They were both very interested in the Civil War.
His grandfather had served in the Civil War. There were Civil War veterans in Mobile, Alabama, when he was growing up that would tell their stories to young men like Sid Phillips and Eugene Sledge. Eugene's dad would let Eugene use the car, and they'd go outside of town to the abandoned Civil War forts.
And a battle had been fought across Mobile Bay at Spanish Fort. And they would go over and dig up all sorts of relics. And then they would go to the local grocery store, and they would have an RC Cola and a moon pie.
At the moment of Pearl Harbor, Eugene was still in high school. He had missed some schooling and had to finish, so I enlisted while Eugene remained at home.
Sidney Phillips was leaving. That was partially why Gene was so anxious to go. Sid was at Guadalcanal and wrote letters home to Gene.
I told Sledge in one of my letters from Guadalcanal that he should join nothing, not even the Girl Scouts, not the Boy Scouts, the Salvation Army. I said, just stay out of everything and anything. Make them draft you if you had to get into the service, but do not join anything.
He decided that the war might end before he could get over there. And so he wanted to join the Marines. He had to ask his parents permission, and his father said, well, they won't take you. You have a heart murmur. He said, well, I want to try anyway. His father was a physician, and he said, let me check you. And there was no heart murmur.
Eugene Sledge was a replacement at Pavuvu after we came off of Cape Gloucester. We always teased Sledge about being a college boy and dropping out of officers training school. He took it real well. He was a good guy to have around the tent. Everything never got dull when he was there.
Eugene was in the 60-millimeter mortars, which is a company weapon.
They shipped out to Peleliu, which was next on the list to be taken out by the Marines. The 1st Marine Division was in the front lines approximately 30 days. He was in combat and under fire that entire time. The next one was Okinawa. The 1st Marine Division landed on Okinawa on April Fool's Day, 1945. He was there, I believe, 82 days on the front lines and in combat at Okinawa.
Gene Sledge did his job and did what he was told to do. You can't ask for any more than that of any man.
Eugene was fine in combat, but combat did not interest him. It horrified him.
There's not a day goes by that I don't think about it. And when I do think about it, I try to force myself to think about the good buddies I had and some of the things that we did that were funny. But then you also remember the dead and how many of them there were. And they were just snuffed out. And there's no way you can forget them.
My buddy Eugene seemed to be haunted by the war.
Gene had nightmares for many years after the war.
My father was particularly bothered by loud bangs, noises, whistles, anything that mimicked artillery fire.
I was probably about 8 years old. I hid in the pantry with my toy Tommy gun. He walked through the room and I jumped out at him. And the next thing I remember was him wheeling around and grabbing me by the shirt and pinning me to the wall. Nothing beyond that happened. I mean, he quickly realized what was going on.
Eugene Sledge had a very difficult time adjusting to civilian life after the war. He was beset, as were many other veterans, with thoughts about why he had survived when so many others had died.
That's one of the cases of war that not only does a man fight in a war, and if he survives, he's got to live with it the rest of his life.
My father would say that one of the worst things about World War II was the complete waste of human life, of human potential, brutalization of the survivors.
His father had treated combat wounded in World War I, and he was very aware of what the men would go through. He told Gene, never feel sorry for yourself. You're safe, you made it through, you're home, you have a life.
What you have to do is to try to focus your mind on other things.
The thing that helped him to conquer the nightmares and the terrible experiences that would flash back into his mind was to start thinking about something in biology. He had found his calling. Biology was his savior.
Ornithology, the study of birds, was really his area of specialty.
He also found that he enjoyed teaching.
My father had a great passion for teaching and was a natural teacher. My father saw himself as a simple scientist with a love of the natural world who had endured something unspeakable and wanted to convey that to later times and other people, and that the best way to do that would be through simply recording what he had observed.
They were not allowed to keep diaries on the front lines, so he had a little New Testament, and he wrote on the pages of that, he would make little notes to help him remember what had happened at what particular point. And when he came home from the war, one of the first things he did was sit down and write out a complete outline of his experiences. It was much, much later, many years, before he went back to it and began filling that in.
He wrote it for his family, for us to know what he had been through and to have some sense of his experience in World War II and something we could pass on to our children.
This is Gene's study. He wrote his book with the old breed at this desk or sitting over in the easy chair. He closed the door and stayed in here for hours writing away.
My first exposure with the old breed was when my mom was typing it. I would read it over her shoulder, and it was just astonishing. It was a surreal experience to think that someone you knew and loved and who was so modest and gentle could have gone through something that horrific and had enough presence of mind to be able to write it down in a coherent fashion and not go mad.
Gene felt that writing the book would lay the war to rest for him.
The experience was so incredibly intense that after it was all over with, life was never the same, because the sunrise is always more beautiful to me now than it ever was before I started into Peleliu on that Amtrak.
He had a great feeling of serenity. He had already been through the worst that life could throw at him, and he knew that he was able to stand up to it.